She flipped through each page of the album, preparing for her wedding, but stumbled upon something that made her heart turn cold. The man who had raised her was not in a single photograph. It wasn't just an empty spot on a photo. It was a painful reminder that there are people who love us with their entire lives, but end up forgotten simply because they always chose to step back. And by the time we realize it, they may have already left, quietly, without asking for anything, without leaving a single word of reproach. She sat in the middle of the floor, surrounded by stacks of old, yellowed photo albums. Beside her, the photo scanner gave off a quiet, steady hum, its light flashing with each picture fed through. Her wedding day was drawing near, and that slideshow, as she had told the video editor, wasn't just about pretty photos. It had to be a journey, a silent film telling the story of those who had been part of her life. The first picture, a 6-year-old girl with a birthday hat tilted to one side, grinning with a gap in her teeth. The second, her mother standing behind her, holding a cake. The next, a picnic in the park, friends gathered around, and even her biological father, a man now long out of contact. Then came the high school graduation photo, then college, then the second-year vacation trip where she beamed brightly under the golden sun. After a while, her hands stopped moving. Her cheeks were still smiling, but her eyes had turned quiet. Not a single photo of Mr. Vaughan. Not once did he appear in the frame. Not at birthdays, not at award ceremonies, not in any Christmas card photo. And strangely, she had never noticed it until now. He was the one who paid for her college tuition. The one who drove her to school every day for 3 years without missing once. The one who worked weekends just to afford the camera she loved. And yet, not a single face, not a single smile of his in that pile of photos. Only an empty space, repeating itself across every chapter of her life. Her brow furrowed, a little surprise, a little confusion, and something just faintly sharp, though she hadn't realized it yet, an absence that seemed invisible, but was the very thing that had made her childhood feel incomplete. At first, she hadn't meant to ask, but that evening when she called her mother to ask about the old dress she once wore at a family party, that question slipped out. "Mom, why is it that in all those old albums, I don't see a single picture of Mr. Vaughan?" There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. No sound of surprise, no awkward laugh, just a pause long enough to feel heavier than any answer. And then her mother simply said gently, "Because he was always the one holding the camera." Such a simple sentence, so light as if it was something everyone already knew. So light, it was almost invisible, but it was that very lightness that made her freeze. A string of memories suddenly lit up all at once, the parties, the holidays, the special occasions. She began to remember every single thing he used to say. "Step back a little so we get the full background." "All right, 1, 2, big smile now. Looks great, let me get one more shot." And it was true, he had always been there, only standing behind the lens. She let out a quiet laugh, small but stiff. The words escaped like a defense mechanism. Maybe he liked it that way. Always behind the camera, never in the way. But when she hung up, that smile was no longer there. Only the glow of the screen reflecting on her face remained, and in her eyes, something had started to quietly crack. Sometimes the simplest answer is the one that can silence an entire room. 3 days later, she met the video editor at a cafe near her home. They sat in a bright corner, small wooden table, laptop open with a draft slideshow on screen. The editor asked gently, "So which photos should we use for the opening? Your mom? Your best friend? Is there anyone else you'd like to add?" She answered without thinking, "Mom, my best friend. And my biological father, the picnic photo from back then is the nicest." Then she paused for half a second, but only half a second. After that, she added one more sentence. "We probably don't need to include any photos of Mr. Vaughan. There aren't any clear ones anyway, and it'll keep things simple." Keep things simple. She didn't know why she'd chosen those exact words. That afternoon, back home, she sat down to revise her wedding speech. There was a section about family where she wanted to thank the people who had been part of her journey growing up. And once again, Mr. Vaughan wasn't mentioned. Not because she hated him, not because he'd done anything wrong. It was simply that he didn't appear in her mind as someone who had to be included. Even though he was the one who paid her senior year tuition when her scholarship got cut. Even though he once waited 3 hours in the car just to drive her home in the middle of the night because it was raining. A few days later, her best friend asked, "Is Mr. Vaughan coming to the wedding? I mean, he raised you, didn't he?" She brushed it off, smiling slightly. "Not exactly. He's just my mom's husband." Her friend stayed quiet, didn't argue, just nodded, took a sip of coffee, but that nod felt heavier than any protest. And that was that. Mr. Vaughan wasn't on the guest list. Not in the slideshow, not in the speech, not in anything tied to the biggest day of her life. Some people are left out not because of any fault of their own, but simply because they stayed silent for too long. 2 days before the wedding, she returned to her old house to pick up the white dress her mother had already hung up in the room. The house no longer held as many belongings as before. Her mother was moving in with her new husband, and this place felt like a shell whose soul had already been emptied out. She walked down the hallway. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through a narrow window slit, casting dust onto the wooden floor. Each step creaked beneath her feet. Everything was strangely quiet, almost as if she could hear her own thoughts. She passed by the small room at the end of the hall, the room Mr. Vaughan had once stayed in. She had meant to walk right past it, but somehow her hand reached for the doorknob and opened it. The room was just as it had always been. Orderly, not perfectly neat, but clean. An old shirt hung behind the door. A camera sat neatly on the desk, its lens slightly scratched, the strap worn along the edges. In the corner of the desk was a small box of mints, long since empty. And then she saw it. A drawer left slightly ajar. She crouched down and pulled it open. Inside was just one thing. A black USB drive, labeled with a strip of white paper in handwriting she recognized immediately. "For Erica, only if you're ready." Nothing else, no letter, no printed photos, no explanation, just a small device, lying there in silence, as if it had been waiting for her all these years. She picked it up. His handwriting was still there, neat, not fancy, not elaborate, but carrying a sense of certainty. Like him. She stood quietly in that room for a while. No lights on, no words spoken, only the faint sound of her own breathing and something shifting very slowly inside her. Some secrets aren't hidden. They're just waiting for us to be ready to open them. That night, she plugged the USB into her laptop. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few old photos, a couple of random shots he'd taken. But when the screen lit up, she froze. Dozens of folders appeared. The file names typed in plain default font, no styling, no colors. Erica, age 4, first day of school, spring concert 2009. She cries after the audition, don't forget. College move-in, from the parking lot. She clicked on one, then another, then another. Each folder was a slice of her life, but not from her point of view. From Mr. Vaughan's. In the first video, she was standing on a small elementary school stage. Braided hair, a purple dress, standing silently, clearly having forgotten the lyrics. Soft laughter could be heard from the audience below. Little Erica lowered her head. The camera shook slightly. Then came his quiet whisper from behind the lens. "It's okay, baby girl. You're still the brightest one up there." She didn't remember ever hearing those words, and had no idea anyone had ever recorded that moment. There was another clip, longer this time. She was sitting in her room, headphones on, quietly crying, not noticing the door slightly ajar. The camera was placed from the hallway, very far away. Her face wasn't clear, but he had recorded it, not to share, but to remember. One particular folder contained just a single photograph. She was holding her Student of the Year award, But the picture was taken from behind the curtain. The stage lights shone on her, and he and his camera stood just beyond the edge of that light. The folder's name, I Stayed Back, she shined. She pulled her chair closer, eyes locked on the screen. She didn't say a word, only her hand tightened slightly on the edge of the desk, and the bridge of her nose began to sting. Each folder was another moment he had quietly shown up, then stepped away. Each video, silent proof that he had always been there, even if he was never in the frame. Her entire childhood captured in full, except through the eyes of someone who had never once been invited to stand in the same picture. She kept opening the folders. Each click felt like a cut straight to the chest. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to keep watching. Graduation day from across the street. A photo taken from beyond the schoolyard fence. She was gripping her diploma tightly, beaming with pride, but the image was blurred slightly by tree branches in the foreground. Mr. Vaughan hadn't entered the school grounds, hadn't stepped in for pictures after the ceremony. He had just stood at a distance and captured that moment like someone who wasn't invited. Prom night, waiting in the car, a video filmed through the car window. She stepped out with her friends, dress sparkling under the lights. There was his quiet voice on the camera. She didn't want me to walk her in, so I'll just wait here till she's inside. No resentment, just acknowledgement, just staying. Another folder contained no pictures, only a handwritten note scanned as an image. Don't forget, she likes peppermint tea after auditions. In the bottom corner was a date, 2013, her teenage years, the age when she thought no one understood her. Then she spotted a small folder. The file name was a single line. She cried that night, I left this at the door. Inside was a photo of a small package, wrapped in newspaper, placed in front of a bedroom door. The sticky note on top read, I know you're mad, still proud of you. V. She didn't remember ever opening that gift. Wasn't sure if she'd ever read that note. Maybe she'd thrown it away. Maybe she had never even known it existed. One more old video, Mr. Vaughan sitting at the dining table, unaware he was being filmed. In his hands was the card she'd drawn back in first grade. He smoothed his fingers gently over the paper, then folded it and placed it inside a tin box, saying nothing, only his eyes, enough to make the viewer's throat tighten. She leaned back in her chair, both hands covering her face. No tears came immediately, but her whole body shook softly, not because he had been forgotten, but because he had never once demanded to be remembered. Some things aren't hidden. We just never looked closely enough to see them. Inside an unnamed folder, there was only a single audio file. The file name was a scanned line of handwriting set as the cover image. If she ever listens to this, I hope she knows. She hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed play. The sound of an old recorder starting up, a faint static hum. A long breath before he began speaking. I know I'm not her real father. I know I never will be. And that's okay. I didn't sign up to be called Dad. I just wanted to make sure she had someone who never left. There was the creak of a chair, as if he were sitting alone in the familiar kitchen. He continued, voice low, slow, and absolutely without a trace of bitterness. She doesn't know I kept the drawing she made in first grade, doesn't know I watched every concert from the side hallway, doesn't know that every birthday I wasn't invited to, I still left something outside the door. Her head dropped onto the table, her hands trembled, the screen stayed lit. The mouse cursor blinked, as if waiting for her to do something. But she didn't do anything. She just listened and endured. There's a kind of love that doesn't ask to be seen, doesn't beg to be thanked, just wants the person it loves to be okay. And if she's okay, then that's all I ever needed. She reached out and stopped the recording before it could finish, not because she didn't want to hear it, but because one more second and her heart would shatter. No one had ever told her that silence could hurt this much. She had once believed he didn't need to be remembered. But it turned out she was the one who needed forgiveness. The next morning, she woke up with swollen eyes. She hadn't slept all night, not because of the voice in the recording, but because of a single question that kept repeating in her head. Does he still think about me? She picked up her phone, opened her contacts, scrolled through, looking for Mr. Vaughan. Nothing. She had deleted it last year. Not for any big reason. She'd just thought she didn't need it anymore. She called her mother. At first, she only meant to ask casually. But the moment her voice came out, it already sounded like she was about to cry. "Mom, do you still have Mr. Vaughan's number?" There was silence on the other end for a moment. He moved away. Last year. Moved to Atlanta. Moved to Atlanta? Yeah, he said he didn't want to get in the way of your important milestones. She froze in the middle of the hallway. The phone slipped in her hand, didn't fall, just loosened. Her fingers trembled, clutching the edge of the table. Another question echoed in her mind. Is he still out there? Do I still have a chance? She opened Facebook. No sign of him. Old email, no response. The house number had changed owners. Every address she typed, every flicker of hope, was met with emptiness. Panic began to set in. No screaming, no crying, just a silent fear growing larger. The fear of having to live her entire life with an apology left unsaid. For the first time in years, she realized she wanted him at her wedding. Not to witness, not to take pictures, but simply so he would know that she remembered him. But now, she wasn't sure if there was still time. When someone leaves quietly, you don't hear the door close, only when you turn back. Do you realize the room is already empty? She opened her wedding speech again on her laptop. An old file saved from 3 weeks ago, a neat polished draft, polite, and completely cold. The first line, "I'd like to thank everyone who stood by me through the years." She read down to the part where it mentioned family, and stopped. She moved the cursor, deleted 3 lines, started typing again, this time slowly, very slowly. To the man who taught me the quietest kind of love, who never stood in the spotlight because he was too busy holding it steady for me, who never asked to be seen, but made sure I was never invisible. Her hands trembled slightly as she typed, each word appearing on the screen like a stitch closing an old wound. Not healing it completely, but at least stopping the bleeding. She reopened the slideshow, inserted the blurriest photo. A picture of Mr. Vaughan standing backstage at one of her old performances, camera strap hanging off to the side, shirt slightly wrinkled, but his eyes shining bright. She placed that photo at the very end of the slideshow. No effects, no caption, simply so that at last he would appear. Then she reprinted the guest list, added 1 line, didn't send it by email, didn't announce it in advance. Just so, if he ever saw it, he would know that this time, his name was there. Not every apology needs to be spoken aloud. Some are written with everything we have left. The wedding took place on a softly sunlit afternoon. An outdoor setting. Rows of chairs lined up perfectly, draped in white fabric, accented with gentle sprigs of lavender. The sound of a piano played slowly in the distance. Everything was meticulously prepared, except for 1 chair at the end of the left-hand row that didn't match the others. There was no guest sitting in it, no name on the seating chart, only a small card placed on the seat cushion. The lettering printed clearly, gently, yet it made hearts feel heavier. Reserved for the man behind the lens. On the chair was a wedding bouquet, a smaller version of the one she held in her hands, and against the chair back was an old black and white photograph, its edges slightly faded. A photo of Mr. Vaughan standing backstage at one of her performances long ago, holding a camera. His eyes were turned toward the stage, where she had once sung her first song. He wasn't smiling, just watching, very quietly. No one asked about the chair, no one said anything, but everyone glanced at it and fell silent. As Erica walked slowly down the aisle, she didn't look straight at the groom at first. She looked at the chair, paused for just a brief moment, long enough to hold back everything she had once left unsaid. Then she gave a small nod. No one saw it, but she knew. If he had been there, he would have nodded back. Not everyone who's absent is forgotten. There are some people, even if they no longer sit among us, are still the reason the entire day feels complete. The wedding reception was in full swing. The clinking of glasses, soft laughter, quiet conversations filled the air. Then the MC stepped up to the stage and announced, "Our bride has a few words she'd like to share." Erica stood up, microphone in hand, still wearing that familiar gentle smile. But there was something in her eyes, something that slowly hushed the entire room. Before I thank everyone here tonight, there's someone I need to talk about. Someone who isn't with us today. He's not in the slideshow, he's not at this party, and in fact, he was never in any of my photos. But every smile I've ever had, every milestone in my life, has his fingerprints on it. The room below fell completely silent. No one said a word. A few people began glancing toward the empty chair at the end of the row. He's the one who drove me to competitions but waited outside the gate. The one who left gifts at my door, then left before I ever opened them. The one who set up the stage lights, but never once stepped into them. Her voice began to catch. Her hand tightened slightly around the microphone. Her chest rose and fell with quiet effort. There's a kind of love that doesn't need to be captured in a photo, because it's already etched into everything we've become. Mr. Vaughan, if you're hearing this, somehow, please know, I remember you. I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, and thank you for always standing behind everything I have. She bowed her head. No applause, and just like that, not a single person clapped. Only a silence so deep. You could hear her mother's choked breath from across the room. A single tissue was passed from table to table, but no one dared to say a word. She had once thought this speech would be for the people sitting right in front of her. But in the end, it was for the one who had never asked for thanks, and who had never once received a hug. A week after the wedding, she returned to her new apartment. The bouquets had withered, the wedding cards had been put away. She opened the final photo file from the USB. It was a camera test shot. Mr. Vaughan had accidentally ended up in the frame. He wasn't looking at the lens, he wasn't smiling. He was simply standing next to a bookshelf, adjusting the strap on his camera. Behind him, on the wall, was a small poster from the very first performance she'd ever joined back when she was 11 years old. She stared at that picture for a long time, and for the first time she saw him, clearly. Not because it was a perfect photograph, but because it existed. There are people who never step into the spotlight, but they're the ones who turned the lights on. There are people who never appear in the frame, but they're the reason we have the most beautiful pictures in our lives. If someone ever stood behind the scenes so you could stand on stage, hit like for them, share this story to honor the people we forgot to thank, and comment below, "I see him now."